Hello everyone, and welcome again to my channel. This time I want to talk about repetition for emphasis. And one of the reasons is because that's one of the points that used to be, or perhaps still is, in the Theocratic Ministry School. And you are taught to basically repeat the main point a couple times during the course of your talk so that the point will stick. And in reality, if you look at Watchtower literature and teachings as a whole, there are really very few main points that they repeat again and again and again. From week to week, you go to meetings that are basically the same. The Theocratic Ministry School and service meeting, and ultimately even the Congregation Book Study, are basically the same every week. The Theocratic Ministry School will change based on the subjects given, but those are very limited in scope. The Congregation Book Study is, of course, taken from Watchtower materials, which have the same basic theme as the rest of their teachings, and the service meetings are all basically the same. The Watchtower study and the public talk are usually very similar. There's a couple of different themes that are covered in either of those two venues. The public talks, there's a couple different themes that span the entire gamut of the almost 200 talk outlines that can be given. And the Watchtower studies, everything is brought down to a couple of simple things, and everything's explained through basically through the lens of those couple simple teachings. So that being the case, everything in Watchtower becomes very repetitive. The big things in Watchtower, of course, are that we're living in times of the end. Armageddon is any second now. The governing body is the channel that God is using to feed his people. You have to be preaching Watchtower message. You have to be associated with Jehovah's people. And you have to be separate from the world. And various different little subtleties on that. So any type of advice that they give in life is basically filtered through that very myopic lens. And that affects the entire way Jehovah's Witnesses live their life. For example, they keep separate from the world since only Jehovah's Witnesses have the truth, since the governing body is God's channel for communication, and so on and so forth. And that affects literally every single aspect, as I have said. So that being the case, when you come right down to it, there's really not very much to discuss when you discuss the teachings of the Watchtower. We can discuss ways that they affect our life, because that is certainly a broad topic, but really the effect is the same thing, just multiplied into various different avenues. And in their tool belt, the Watchtower, as their primary tools, use fear and guilt. And that fear and guilt are the things that keep people wrapped up in Watchtower for so long. And they are also the things that can make it so hard to leave once you have woken up from what the Watchtower is. So, for example, when you become awake to the fact that the Watchtower does not teach the truth and never has, well, all of a sudden you have a whole lot of fear. You have fear of what people will think of you because you have been instructed for a long time of how bad it is to doubt. You have fear of losing your friends. You have fear of losing your family. And deep down, you may still have a fear somewhere that, well, what if the Watchtower is right? So there's all this fear that is keeping you trapped in the prison of the Watchtower, even when you have the knowledge to demonstrate that what they're preaching is not in line with what the Bible teaches. So I've thought about this for a long time because as I've been making the videos for this channel, it occurs to me that the videos really don't cover that many topics. They just basically talk about what the Watchtower has done to us and how that applies in various different ways in our life. And basically that becomes very repetitive, and I've noticed this. And I've had individuals comment on that as well, and I appreciate that input. But when I think about it, when I first woke up, I realized within myself an almost obsessive need to go over the same information again and again and again, because I wanted to make 100% sure, in fact 200% sure, that I was not being misled. And when you take something that's been instructed in you your whole life and it's been locked in place through fear and guilt, dislodging that belief can be a difficult thing to do. And since things were taught to us in such a repetitive manner, it occurred to me that perhaps that's why it was necessary, at least in my case, to go over the same information numerous different times just to make sure I wasn't being fooled. It wasn't just to prevent myself from being fooled, but also to reinforce that what I was seeing was in fact the truth. And the second thing that I needed to do when I first woke up is I needed to go through the experiences of others. I needed to read them or hear them if there were videos or anything. I just needed to get as much of that as I could. And sometimes I would go through those things a couple of times. So that's a process that I went through, and I think it's a process that perhaps many of us go through. And there gets to be a certain repetition to this process. Perhaps that's because what we were used to in the Watchtower. Perhaps we need some of that to help us to break the cycle. I don't know. But myself, I'm getting to the point on this channel where I'm trying to find something different, something interesting, something else that I can bring. So far, I've been able to bring the standpoint of an elder, which I think is crucial because a lot of people that have been Jehovah's Witnesses have been taught for a long time to basically hold the elders with mystical awe, if you will. The elders in a lot of people's minds almost have these supernatural powers where if you do something wrong, they're just somehow going to know it. And that's not the way it works. Elders are just normal people. But elders act as if they're something special in a lot of cases. And doing that has been very detrimental to a lot of people. It's been very abusive. And there's a number of reasons for that, but some of the individuals that attain that position do so because they want to have power over others. Others that are like that may be like that because that's the way they've been instructed to be by the governing body. And if you look at the whole mentality of Jehovah's Witnesses through the Watchtower literature, the thinking is very black and white. So when somebody is a really good Jehovah's Witness, they wind up having severely black and white thinking. And according to whatever their personal preferences are, they're going to exercise their black and white thinking as if they have the righteous end-all be-all authority. So the way that they handle people will vary greatly from congregation to congregation. And of course this becomes obvious from circuit overseer to circuit overseer as well. When you have different circuit overseers, they have different things they get hung up on. So that's kind of the way that whole thing works. But the structure of Jehovah's Witnesses, when you step back and look at it, really is not very complicated. It's actually rather simple. The trick is in convincing people to follow them without thinking for such a long time. And that, I think, is where the damage really happens. People are forced not only to shut off their thinking skills, but to purposefully go against them when they realize that what they're being taught is wrong. And not only that, but they are taught to think that they are evil for thinking that their questions about what they're being taught are legitimate. So the whole theory with finding something that doesn't make sense and then having a question about it, right away you think that you're a bad person for having that question. And that's not a healthy way to approach things. So those of us who have spent any amount of time in the Watchtower, perhaps decades, we've had a long time of this unhealthy way of thinking that we've been utilizing that's been imposed upon us, and we've kind of pushed our own personality away. So I think there's a period that we go through where we're kind of groping to find our way as to what to do. We're kind of reaching out there, trying to figure out what direction to go, what do we really want to do, perhaps even who we really are, how should we really think. And sometimes I think just the repetition of hearing those things again and again might be what we need to help us to start that journey. But if we're making that journey in a progressive manner, there should come a point at which that level of repetition is no longer necessary. Now, different ones of us will reach that point at different times. And that's just because we're different people. There's no way to measure yourself as to how long that takes. But one thing I think that would be beneficial is to realize that that is perhaps part of the process, but also a healthy part of the process is moving on, having those things become perhaps less important. And it takes time, and I realize that. So part of the reason why I have continued to make as many videos as I have is because I I would like to think that perhaps this is helping some people. So at this point, I want to continue to do that, but I also want to find something that's less repetitious and that brings something new and something fresh to the table. And a lot of that is my train of thinking is not just like, let's demonstrate the Watchtower is wrong, because I kind of feel that the channel has done that. We can talk about how the elder arrangement works and all that, but it's all just a subset of one really simple thing. The whole organization is basically thoroughly broken, and the elders are just pieces on that broken chessboard that are moved around, sometimes to their will and sometimes not. So in a situation like that, you can't get good outcomes in numerous occasions. And I guess that's kind of putting everything in a nutshell. So the elder arrangement is deeply broken, is what it comes right down to, but that's because it comes from a deeply broken organization. So my inputs as having been an elder, I think the point has gotten across. Now I want to try to find something different, because really, as people, it's better for us not to get stuck in one place, but to move on with our lives in some way, shape, or form. So moving on with our lives involves more than just understanding that the Watchtower is wrong, that the elders have no authority, that the Watchtower has no authority. It involves understanding how to cope with our thoughts, cope with our feelings, cope with our emotions. One of the most interesting things about modern society is that a lot of people think that to be a man, for example, that men don't have emotions or something along those lines. But nothing could be further from the truth. As people, emotions are intricately part of who we are. Be you man, woman, child, girl, whatever. Everybody has emotions, and understanding that and accepting those and learning how to not be judgmental about them, I think, is a crucial skill in life that will help us to process what we've been through and to accept it. So there's a lot there. I think I kind of want to start heading somewhere in that direction with the channel, but I'm really not sure yet. That being said, one of the biggest things I think when you leave the Watchtower is the fear factor. There's a lot of fear we have to deal with, and a lot of us have a lot of people that we care about that are still stuck in the Watchtower, and we don't want to lose them. That's understandable because they're a big part of our life. But one thing that we have to keep in mind is that those people are not currently in charge of their own thinking process. They are under mind control. When it comes to interacting with us, they end up doing what the Watchtower tells them to do. When they try to interact with us through whatever means, it's just proof that they really don't want to follow the Watchtower's rules about interacting with us. But they're being forced to do that, and since they're still deeply under the mind control, that comes across to us as very hurtful. And that's the way the Watchtower wants it. The whole shunning process is all about emotional blackmail, and they say as much in their literature. There's a number of experiences where people came back because they couldn't stand not talking with their families. So there's a number of things, I'll call them post-Watchtower, that we need to deal with if we are to move on. And I kind of think that applies not just to us, but that applies to people leaving many different cults, because Watchtower is not the only cult out there. There are lots of other ones. So these skills, if we can learn to cope with these things, I think will help us a lot in life. It'll help us to move on. It'll help us to deal with our situations. It'll help us to live productive lives. It'll help us to be the happiest people that we have the ability to be. And it'll help us to deal with the ups and downs that life naturally deals with us, or deals to us, rather. So anyways, that's just a thought, but I've been thinking about these things. So you may notice a slowdown in this channel. I'm kind of taking some time trying to figure out which direction to go. The ironic thing is I would have done this sooner had it not been for the guy that hacked my account. But anyways, that's just my video for this time. So thanks for watching.